Hi, good morning. Good morning. So if you saw that screen or you see the frantic waving in front, I am not Ryan Kramer. It was supposed to be, I know, surprise. It was supposed to be Ryan Kramer here. And so he was here this morning doing his sermon run through. And it turns out this morning, he's got pneumonia. I know. Best part though, he's got pneumonia and he thought he'd still do the sermon. So he was here as only he would, right? So he was here and he was doing his run through and he was hacking and he couldn't breathe and he kept being like, no, I can get through this in a microphone. And so we decided at 8 a.m. that I would get to do the sermon instead so that the guy with pneumonia could go home. So that's why I'm here. And that's why some high school students are in here because it was decided, thank you. My name's Stacie, by the way. I am a teaching pastor here. I'm not just like, I was hanging out and I was like, cool, give me a mic, I'll do it. Like I do work here. But that does mean that in this room, there's a couple of high school students who didn't know they were gonna be here today. So if you see them, be nice to them. This was a surprise to them as well that they found out at 8 a.m. as well. So we're gonna hang out and we are in a series called Sons and Daughters and I am going to be reading Ryan's notes and telling Ryan's stories. So if you haven't met Ryan, I know, you guys are like, let's go, let's see what she does. But if you haven't met Ryan, he's not me and I'm gonna do the best that we can. But luckily, we do have a few similarities, like he was in youth ministry, and also he is what you might call a hyperactive person. And so one of the things he was sharing with us this morning, and he wanted to get to start his talk with, is he said growing up for him, he said school was really, really difficult for him. And not school like academics, teachers. Teachers were really, really difficult for a young Ryan Kramer because for him, teachers always represented rules. Teachers always represented like authority and discipline, and they were always up there to kill his fun. He's like, they were always trying to force something. He said, they were always trying to force me to learn. And here are the things he remembers being forced to learn. He goes, I didn't have any interest in learning about quadratic equations, as students do, and learning about the geological structure of limestone. So for young Ryan Kramer, apparently teachers, this is what you were forcing him to learn. This just tells you what academics were. But he also says, as this hyperactive person, he's like, teachers were always forcing me to sit. Teachers were always forcing me to hold still. Teachers were always forcing me to behave. And he never, ever wanted to. He wanted to be with his friends, and he wanted to be a rascal, and he wanted to be running around. And so teachers were always just telling him that he was in trouble. That was all he remembered as a kid. And he remembers that changing right around the 6th grade. He says he was in 6th grade and his teacher said to him, hey, I need you to hang out after class. And he knew what that meant because he'd gotten this all the time. So after class, he walks up to his teacher's desk and he says, the first thing he says to her is he goes, what did I do and what am I gonna have to do because of it? Like, can you imagine? This is an 11-year-old boy who's like, I know I'm in trouble. Just tell me what I did and tell me what the consequence is gonna have to look like. And she goes, hold on. That is not what this moment is. She says, actually, I wanna talk to you about something basically the opposite of that. She goes, I've been reading your writing, like your writing assignments. And Ryan, you're a really good writer. Like you are actually incredibly creative in the things that you write and the way that you use words. The stuff that you write is really interesting. And I just wanted to tell you, I think you're doing a good job. And he says, he's like, as an 11-year-old, he didn't have a category for this. This like authority figure who's always boring and telling him that he's in trouble is suddenly saying, I actually think you might be creative and I think you're interesting. Like he literally just didn't have a category. And he goes, okay, so what do I do with this? And she goes, here's what I would love to see from you, like a challenge. The next time you have a writing assignment, I don't want you to make something up. I want you to actually write about your real life. I want you to write about something you really see, you really experience, a story that really happened to you. I want you to try this new thing. And he goes, okay. And he walks out. And what he didn't know is the next part of their writing assignments were gonna have to do with poetry. And so for him, he's like, I've never done poetry, but this is an interesting place I'm at with this teacher, so I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna pick up this challenge. So he said he wrote and he did his best, he turned it in, and a couple weeks later, this teacher again is like, hey, I need you to stay after class. And he said he remembers thinking like, here it is. See, last time wasn't real. This is it. And he walked back up to her desk and basically said, okay, so why am I in trouble now? And she finally had to be like, dude, you got to stop saying that to me. I promise you, I'm going to let you know when you're in trouble. It's not going to be a shy moment. You're going to know. That's not what this is. In fact, she said, actually, I wanted to talk to you about that poem that you wrote. Dude, you did a really, really good job. I had a great time reading your poetry. It was creative and it was interesting. And she said to him, in fact, you did such a good job. I entered your poem into a state competition. She said, I entered it into a competition and you actually came in second place. And then he said he still remembers that she said to him, she congratulated him on this competition. And then she said, your ability to weave words is powerful, and I am excited to see what you are going to do with it. Can you imagine being a sixth grader in this moment? For so long, teachers are an authority figure who's basically against you, telling you all the ways that you are wrong and you are not enough, and they're kind of just boring, and they're all the way over there. And then this teacher shows up and says, you're creative. And she says that she finds you interesting, and she says that she's proud of you and she's proud to have you in her classroom. He said it was just the most shaping, changing moment. But what he shared that he started to realize is it didn't just change the way he saw himself. Like he embraced the way that she saw him and goes, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can actually engage in this thing. But it didn't just change the way he viewed Ryan Kramer. It also changed the way that he viewed that teacher. No longer was she this like rules and authoritarian and this thing that he was actually a little bit like in battle with. Instead, he said, I started to see that she was someone who actually loved learning. I started to see that this teacher wanted to bring out the best in me, that she was someone who could celebrate the strengths of her students. And then when it came to her students, they weren't just these bodies that sat in chairs, that she actually cared about each and every one of them and wanted to see good things for each and every one of them. And he said, to this day, I consider it an honor to have been in her classroom. And it's just amazing that when we really open ourselves up and embrace how somebody else sees us, not only does it shape and impact and change the way that we view ourselves, but it actually changes and shapes and impacts the way that we view them. When we open ourselves up to how somebody sees us, it doesn't just change how we see ourselves, it actually changes the way that we see that person. And the same is true with God. That when we open ourselves up to embrace how God sees us, it actually changes the way that we see God. It changes the way that we see and the way that we are impacted and the way that we are shaped by how we see God. And that's what we're gonna actually take the time to get to talk about today. Because we're in this series called Sons and Daughters. And the reason we wanted to do this series is because all over scriptures and in several of our worship songs, even some this morning, we're told that we are sons and daughters of God, that we are the children of God. But we don't always know what to do with that. Like this is what one verse from a part of the Bible called John 1:12 says, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. And another part of the Bible, 1 John 3 says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God, and so we are. That you and I are sons and daughters and children and kids of God is a really, really big deal, not just in how we see ourselves, but that when we actually open ourselves up to believe that, to embrace that, it doesn't just change us, it changes the way that we see God. And so we're gonna get an opportunity to talk about that today. And so to talk about that, we're gonna be looking at a part of the Bible that's called Galatians. So if you are someone who likes to turn there or open on your phone, it's gonna be roughly Galatians 4. But if not, the verses are gonna be up on the screen too. And so Galatians is a book of the Bible that was actually a letter written to a church in Galatia, written by a guy named Paul. And the church in Galatia is actually battling with part of this question. They are battling with what does it mean to know and follow God? And Paul, as you read through Galatians, you start to discover, especially in this section, he's really writing to two different audiences. There are two different audiences in this church in Galatia. And I actually think for us today, there are many of us who would fall into one of these audiences that Paul is going to write to as they're struggling to figure out what it means to know and follow God. There's one audience who has decided we are going to turn to what we're going to call an empty religion in their efforts to know and follow God. They've decided that if I follow the Bible well enough, if I learn what God is expecting from me, what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do, that's how I'm going to please God. It's very similar to how Ryan viewed teachers, as if God is this authoritarian figure over there, and what the Bible gives me and what my job in life is to do is to figure out what I'm supposed to do, what I'm not supposed to do, figure out the good behavior and the bad behavior so that I don't have to deal with an angry disciplinarian over there. And if I'm good enough, then he's going to be fine with me. And so what Paul's going to start to refer to this in the passages is he's going to start to say it's like they are juveniles who's in need of a nanny or a guardian. And we're going to talk about that. We'll see that in Galatians 4. But people who have turned to this idea of empty religion, if I look and I just follow the right rules, that's how I know God and that's how I'm going to be okay. Paul starts to refer to them as these juveniles in need of a nanny or of a guardian. But there's another audience, and they didn't turn to religion because for them in this area of Galatia, and for many of us in here, they didn't grow up necessarily in religion. So that's not necessarily the thing that's like shaped their worldview. They grew up without faith or without a religious structure, and they've actually come to know God later in life. And they're trying to be a part of this church, and they're going, well, all of my life, I just followed the principles basically of the world around me. However, the world around me told me is my value and my worth. I'm going to guess that God's exactly the same thing. And that's true for the people of Galatia, but it's probably true for us. And for them, much of what they viewed the world as, it could have been described as a dog-eat-dog world. That when they looked around them, they saw people either competing for their value and their worth, succeeding to be able to be the best or to be enough, or else you've lost everything. You have gotten strong enough to get what's yours. You've gotten strong enough to keep what is yours, or you're weak and you've lost it or somebody has taken it away from you. And so they see it as my worth and my value comes from what I can do and from what I can accomplish. It's what I see in the world around me, so I'm gonna guess God is exactly the same way. I can earn it and then I prove it. And Paul's going to refer to this group as juveniles who have become slaves to the forces of this world. So when Paul writes in Galatians, the two audiences he has is trying to know God and trying to figure out what's my place in this world. They've either found themselves stepping in and following this religious system of if I just do the right thing, God's okay with me. Or they've fallen into this juveniles of the slaves of what the way they see the rest of the world doing. And that must be who God is and that must be who I am. And Paul wants to argue there's another way. That when we really embrace and open ourselves up to being children of God, sons and daughters of God, there's a different way of relating and seeing who God is. And that's why he's gonna write this part of Galatians. And so just to understand, he really wants us to know, we're gonna start, it's Galatians 3, verse 26. He really wants to emphasize this. So he says, so in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. He basically starts this section saying, I need you to know you are neither of these things. You are children of God. And then he jumps into Galatians 4, 1 through 2. And he says, what I'm saying is that as long as an heir is underage, he's no different from a slave, although he owns that whole estate. The heir is subject to guardians and to trustees until the time set by his father. And there's something in here when he calls us heirs, there's something about that we miss because of a difference in our culture, but is really, really a big deal that Paul wrote this. So imagine for a second, you go through life and you have amassed like a small fortune. So you have something to give away when in your will. And imagine that you've got 3 kids. Like you've had 3 kids in your life, you've amassed this and you're sitting down to do your will. For much of us in our culture, the way that we would deal with that would be with fairness. We'd be like, okay, so I separate my assets evenly between my 3 kids and then everybody's gonna be okay. In fact, for many times, if we separate our assets in a way that people feel like is really, really unfair, it can cause a lot of discord in that family. I've known people where their whole job is to walk along with families to try and keep them from turning into fighting when a will is being read. Because if they read that will and they feel like assets have not been split up, you can have lawsuits, you can have chaos, you can have resentment and fights. You can actually have families torn apart because that will didn't feel like it was fair and fairly split up between all the family members and between all the kids. That's kind of what makes sense to us. But for Paul, when he utilizes the word heir, there's a completely different understanding of what to do with assets and what an heir is. Because for Paul and his readers, a family is not composed of your individual family members. A family is an entire household. And so when you have this entire household, you pass on everything that is to the firstborn son. The firstborn son inherits the entire household, including inheriting all of the responsibility in maintaining it and keeping it going and making sure that it stays whole so that it's able to be passed along when they pass to their firstborn son as well. And so in this culture, the oldest son is the person who has the highest value because in the family, they were to receive everything that the father has. And so when Paul says that we are an heir of God, he's not saying you're like one of many who get distributed to evenly and fairly. He's saying you get access to all that the Father has. That is an incredibly big deal with an incredible amount of value. But Paul writes, if an heir is still just a juvenile, he's no different from a slave because he might own the whole estate, but someday, right now, it's not actually his. Because in this culture, if somebody is underage, and we know this, have you ever spent time with a 15-year-old? Like you don't look at a 15-year-old and say, hey kid, no offense, all of this household is now yours, run it and do well. Like there's not a lot of wisdom in that. So we understand there's an age limit to saying all of this is now yours and do your best. And so if you were a juvenile, if you were underage, you didn't just get the entire estate. You were given a nanny. You were given a guardian. And that nanny or guardian is actually responsible for you until you come of age. They tell you what to do. They tell you how to behave. They tell you how to move through this life until you reach an appropriate age. And when you become a full adult, the nanny leaves and you are now free to be able to do as you please. And so what Paul is saying in this section is, even though God has made you and me and has made us sons and daughters, children of God, we are heirs to all that he has and all that he's given us. Some of us still live like God is this authoritarian teacher and that the Bible is the textbook. It is the textbook to tell us all the things we're supposed to know, so we know what we're supposed to do, what we're not supposed to do, to be able to stay in his good graces. And so some of us continue to treat the Bible like this religion as if it's our nanny, and it stands between us and God, and it tells us what to do because we're still juveniles living underneath this religious system. And as long as we're juveniles, we're not able to be the heir of all that God has for us because we're not of age, because we're hiding behind the nanny instead. So for some of us in here, I wonder how many of us still see God as the keeper of the rules, kind of like Ryan Kramer sees teachers, that God is an authoritarian figure full of discipline, standing right over there, telling you all the ways that you've done wrong. And you just keep waiting for him to sit down and tell you all the ways that you're in trouble. You're in trouble again, and here's gonna be your consequence. And we just see that as being God standing over there like this authoritarian figure, and I just need to do all the right things and follow all the right behaviors to be okay. Or how many of us in here have seen the Bible to be like a textbook? It is a textbook that we are meant to memorize and a rule book that we are meant to follow. And I know for some of us in here, this has created such a tense stance and posture when it comes to the Bible for us, because the Bible has been used for so long to tell us all the ways that we are not enough, we don't measure up, we are failures, we're never doing well enough. And so when we come to the Bible, we come to God like Ryan Kramer we're looking at, okay, tell me again why I'm bad. Tell me again why I'm not enough. Tell me again why I am a problem. So rather than the Bible being a reminder of God's love for us, it continues to remind us of all the ways that we have failed. And just so you know, Ryan and Seth or Glenn or myself, we experience this so often with people. Do you know what it is to be in public? I see this all the time. And they ask you like, oh, what do you do? Oh, who are you? What do you do? And you tell them you're a pastor. I can like tell you the first thing people do, the first thing they do is go, I am so sorry if I swore. It's the first thing that we do. They immediately apologize if they said a swear word. And in fact, they're not even sure all the time if they actually swore. They're trying to think back in that moment to be like, oh, and I just told her that joke. I'm sorry about that joke that I just said. I'm sorry about that behavior. I'm sorry about, if they've got like an alcoholic drink around them, immediately they're like, is that what you do? Like they're immediately apologizing for themselves because they see religion as this nanny that's consistently telling them their good and their bad behaviors, and they're immediately apologizing for all the ways that they are not good or the way they think that they've messed up. And sometimes this can be so sneaky and we don't see it. But Paul says it's almost like you've become a slave to this situation. You're still a juvenile hiding behind your nanny instead of stepping into being a son or a daughter and this full heir of what God has. But Paul also recognizes that there's another audience. There's another audience of us too. And he says in Galatians 4:3, so also, when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of this world. So basically, Paul says some of us are living like juvenile slaves to this religious system, but some of us have accidentally become slaves to the principles or the elemental rules of this world. And that's just a really fancy way. The elemental spiritual forces are basically like, think about the norms of this world. Think about the principles of this world. We take the things that we understand of this world and we go, that must be how God functions, how God sees me, how I find my value and my worth there as well. And so ask yourself, in this world, where do I see my worth and my value coming from? And do I ever hold that against God? Because for many of us, our value and our worth come from the thing that we're able to produce. This is so true for us at work. You are only as valuable as the work and the numbers and the bottom line and the efforts that you are able to produce. You are valuable only insofar as you can prove it to someone, prove it to your boss, prove it to your company, prove it to someone around you that you have value and you have worth. You got to make your case. You are valued and you are worth because you have talent, because of how talented you are, because of how attractive you might be. And it always feels like there's this natural pecking order to some of the rules, the principles that guide this world. It says if you are not the best, if you are not the most talented, if you are not the most attractive, then you run the risk of being overlooked. If you are not the best, then maybe you're not actually enough. If you are not this top tier getting the most amount of attention, maybe it says something about your value and your worth and whether or not you are enough. And so we will do anything we can to gain power, to gain strength, or we will attach ourselves to people that we think might give it to us. And when we live this way, it can lead to so many different places for us. And some of us are already so acutely aware of when we follow the principles of this world, what it leads when it comes to our value and our worth, because it's led some of us to become workaholics. I fall into this trap so much. If our value is in what we produce, then I need to work more and I need to work more and I need to work more, no matter the cost. Burnout, time with family, my value, my worth come from what I'm producing. I bet God's the same way, so I need to be a workaholic. Or we become a perfectionist, because if mistakes define us as failures, then we can never have a mistake. And we must become a perfectionist. And we don't mean to, but sometimes we start to hold those criticisms against the people who are closest to us also. We can accidentally do this to our kids. We think we're holding these perfectionist standards to ourselves because we're worried our value and our worth are on the line. The kids are watching us. And they watch us be critical of them. They watch us be critical of ourselves, and they go, maybe that is how the world works. Maybe I really will never measure up and I'll never be enough because it becomes exhausting. Or we can become so absolutely consumed with how we look or how we don't look and how we fight aging. I was just having a conversation with one of my friends because as we enter into these late 30s, we're starting to encounter these conversations where it's almost like aging has become this enemy for us. My friend was saying, I just feel like I'm going to war with the mirror every single day. And I'm so worried. I never like who that person is because I'm supposed to be young. I'm supposed to be this. I'm supposed to look this certain way. And they were sharing, they're like, it almost makes it so that this life I lived has lost a little bit of value because it's kind of become my enemy, because it means that I'm aging and I'm not actually able to appreciate it because I look in the mirror and I become my own worst enemy, because if that's my value, if that's my worth, then that's the thing I need to be fighting the most. Some of us find ourselves where we have compromised the way that we feel, we've compromised the way that we think, we've compromised elements of our morality because we just keep looking around going, what's cool, what's powerful, what will be the definition of success, because that's where my worth and that's where my value is. And what many of us have discovered is when we live by these principles, when we live by this way of things, it's exhausting because it's never done. We just live on this hamster wheel. We're never attractive enough. We never produce enough. We're always scared of the person behind us. We're always scared of somebody else's opinion. And we're on this hamster wheel and it gets exhausting. And it becomes a weight that we carry and we become so fatigued and we become so anxious that we don't really have a way to be able to cope. And so we find ourselves turning to anything to help us carry that weight. And that's how many of us can end up turning to substances, or we turn to materialism, or we turn to addiction because we're just looking for a way to cope with the weight of never really having our value and our worth secure. We're always fighting for it on this hamster wheel. And Paul says, you guys, we can choose to live as these juvenile slaves to a religious system. We can choose to live as these slaves to the ways of this world around us, or we can recognize that being sons and daughters of God, of an heir of everything that he has, really is completely different, really gives us access to seeing ourselves and seeing God in a completely different way. Galatians 4, verses 4, he says, but when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman and born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. And so Paul's writing this saying that the time came for humanity to have something else, to stop living under this brutal thing of the religion, to stop living as if slaves to the way of the world, that something else had come. And so Jesus shows up to say, there is another way to embrace who you are and to be able to live out of that. And Paul says he's born of a woman, which means that he had to walk through the same rules of the world for him. He had people in his world pressuring him the same way we have principles and rules of our world to say, that's where your value and your worth come from. And he looked at it and he said, no, there is something else. I will not jump on that hamster wheel. I will not carry that pressure. I will not carry the weight of that because there's something better as a son and a daughter of God. And he was born a Jew, which means that he grew up in one of the most extensive and structured religious systems to exist in this world. So he had people around him all the time telling him, you want your value and your worth, you need to follow this religious system. It is all about what you are supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, and make sure that God is fine with that and not this angry authority figure over there. And he looked at that and said, there's another way. That when we are sons and daughters and children of God, we don't have to be slaves to those things. Instead, by following him and by putting our faith in Jesus, we get to be formally adopted as sons and daughters of God. In fact, Paul uses a very specific word there when he talks about adoption. He uses the legal term for adoption to be able to emphasize that when this moment happens, this isn't just Paul saying, so you become part of the family like some cousin. He uses the legal term for adoption to say it is as if now you are by blood. You are fully a kid of God. You are fully an heir to all that God has. You are a son, you are a daughter, not on the outskirts of family, but with this full and legal adoption as sons and daughters and children of God. And so, for the rest of this morning, I want to get to ask us this question. How do we come to see ourselves the way that God sees us, knowing that it changes, it impacts, and it matters in how we see God? How do we get to truly see ourselves as the sons and the daughters of God? And the first thing is to make ourselves at home. And I know that sounds a little odd, but I remember talking to Ryan Kramer about that, and this point mattered so much to him because he's like, we know what it means to make ourselves at home because we've experienced this. Last week, Ryan Kramer's dad owns part of a timeshare in Rocky Point or Puerto Penasco, and it's on the beach. And so Ryan Kramer and his dad got together and they invited a group of us out for spring break. And we're like, come hang out with us. It's going to be awesome. And so this group of like 25 of us got to go out there, and it was a blast. But you know, managing a group of 25 people can be real, real tough. And so what Ryan did right in the beginning of the week is he said, hey, I need you to know, I've cooked the food I'm gonna cook. Everything that's in the fridge is yours. All the food that's on the countertops, it's yours. If you need anything, go through the cabinets. Make yourselves at home. Make yourselves at home here and let's have a good time, which sounds really cool, right? But totally not real. He will tell you, myself even, all week long, people were going up to him and be like, hey, do you care if I use that thing that's in the fridge? Hey, I just need to get a bowl. Do you mind if I get in there and I get this bowl? Hey, these were sitting on the counter. I took my kids. I was like, do you care if I feed these to my kids? And he must have repeated himself 30 times. He's like, dude, make yourself at home. It's fine. Get in there. Get in. But he realized, he's like, well, that's because this is my dad's house. This is my dad's house. I grew up coming to this house. So for me, I walk into this house in Rocky Point and this is mine. I can go in the kitchen. I go in the fridge. I go in the cabinets. I am here. This is my place. But for all the rest of us, dude, we're guests. And you know, as a guest, you're like, don't annoy the host. I want to be invited back. I need to clean up after me. I need to be careful. Like you have these boundaries and you have these limitations because you are a guest. Whereas for him, he's like, no, this is my dad's house. I'm gonna make myself at home. This is mine now. I get to step in here and have ownership of this. And while I can't relate to it for this house, I totally relate to this when it comes to my own parents. My parents live here in Tucson. And I'm really tight with them. And I can't tell you how often I have shown up at their house and I'm putting in the door code to open their garage. And I'm like, ooh, I did not tell them that I was coming. I don't live here. And I did not tell anyone that I was gonna come bursting through this door right now. And like, I'm just coming over to hang out with my brother. I can walk straight into the kitchen. I can walk out and use their pool and I don't give them a heads up. And it is because I'm so comfortable there. I'm welcome in this house. I belong in this house. My parents are always excited to see me. They always want to hear my stories. They want me to bring my kids over and take over their backyard. It's my parents' house and I am completely welcome there. I know what it means to make myself at home in my parents' house. I'm not a guest. And for some of us, when it comes to God and it comes to seeing him and ourselves as a son and child of God, part of us, we don't mean to, but we still see ourselves as guests. And we're still walking around thinking, okay, I don't want to annoy him because I don't want to get kicked out. Okay, I need to be really careful and I need to ask for permission and I need to be really conscious because I don't know if I'm really welcome here, and I keep waiting for the storyline to change and them to like uninvite me from ever coming back. And Paul's saying like, stop, make yourself at home. You are his kid. Make yourself at home in that relationship. Trust he really does like you. Trust that he really is excited to see you and to know you and to have this relationship with you. What does it look like for you to get to make yourself at home in your relationship with God? Because the second thing I think that we get to see from Paul and what he says in Galatians is that we get to choose if we get to see God as our heavenly Father. See, he's not done in this book of Galatians. This is what Paul writes in verse 6. Because you are his sons and his daughters. God sent the Spirit of his Son into your heart, and it's the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. And you are no longer a slave. You are God's child. And because you are his child, God has also made you an heir. And so because of God's love, he's enfolded us into his family and he's given us his Spirit so that we are able to call out Abba, Father, which is an Aramaic word that could not be more intimate. It is not saying like Father who is over there. It is saying, this is my dad. This is an intimate word to say, I get to call out to God and say, Dad, do you see me? Dad, do you care? Dad, how are we doing? I get to say dad to him. And you know, Ryan Kramer and I, before he was in here, he was similar to me where we got to work in high school all the time. And I love high school students. They're great. But they're also like a lot all the time, that 15 to 18 range is a lot. And so we both have stories every once in a while that like are, you know, if you don't work in youth, they might be scary. To us, they're fun. And that really, really is true when it comes to this thing about summer camp. Summer camp, we for years here at Cassis, I know it's coming up. That's why they're very excited. It's coming up. It's the first week in June. You should join us if you're a high school student. But what we do is we take our students and we go to California and we actually get to stay on a college campus. And so the kids get to stay in the dorm rooms and we get to do a bunch of stuff like in their theater spaces. And we go to the beach and we go to a water park, and it is an amazing week. It is beautiful and meaningful, and I love it so, so much. And also, it is taking about 100 high school students to California, and so a little bit of chaos ensues. And it did the same thing for Ryan Kramer. For me, part of what I have come to accept about summer camp is that on the last night, my guys are gonna get together and they are going to do Fight Club. It's just what they're gonna do, and I can't talk about Fight Club because you don't talk about Fight Club into a microphone in front of the adults. And you sign a waiver and it's fine, but that's what I get to navigate. Yeah, see? And we talk about Jesus, it's great. But like, it's a whole thing. So what Kramer got to deal with wasn't Fight Club. He got to deal with his freshman boys. And he remembers the first night of summer camp. They're in California, they're staying in the dorms, and he gets a call from the college, which is absolutely never a good thing. The college has never called me the first night of camp to be like, man, I just want you to know your kids are behaving so great. Not a thing. They called him the first night and they're like, hey, we have this certain room, this dorm room, and we've gotten a lot of complaints, like noise level complaints, and I need you to go check it out. So he saw who it was. He's like, it's my freshman boys. I wonder what they're doing. And he said he remembers walking into the room, but they didn't see him. And the way that this dorm room was structured is you had a bunk bed on this side, and then you had a single bed on this side of the dorm room. And he walked in where one of his 15-year-old boys is jumping from the top of the second bunk bed across the room to elbow pile drive that single bed right here. And if that, I mean, like, come on, that looks like a little cool, right? You're like flying squirrel 15-year-old. I see my high school students in here, except when he pile drives and he lands on the bed, he breaks it in half. Yeah. But see, you're adults, so you gasp. What they do is they're like, that's awesome. And so immediately the second freshman boy who was already up on the second level of the bunk bed, he jumps off on one of the broken parts and he breaks it a little bit more. And so this bed ends up being completely shattered. Within seconds of Ryan standing in the doorway, this bed is shattered. And he said he remembers, they're all laughing and joking, and then they turn towards the door and there is 6'5" Ryan Kramer, and he is not laughing and he is not joking. And you can feel the energy in the room shift. And he wrote down what he said to them. But my favorite thing about this is when you work with students, you're kind of their pal. Like oftentimes in high school, if kids are getting in trouble, I'm often right alongside with them. It's just kind of how it works. But every once in a while, there's this line that gets crossed where like the full adult in you has to come out, and the voice changes and the face changes and everybody around you goes, oh, this just got real, real, real. And that's what happens to Ryan Kramer right here. And he said, as the boys turn to him, he sees them all opening their mouths, getting ready with their story, right? And so he says to them, I do not want an explanation. I do not want to hear a story about what you were or you were not thinking. I do not want to hear some made up lie about what just happened. I want you to be silent. I want you to get this picked up, and then I want you to come downstairs with me to talk to the campus employees and tell them what you just did. So, things changed a little bit for these 15-year-olds. And one of them, this is the first thing he'd ever done with Cassis, and he became instantly scared of Ryan Kramer. Like instantly scared. This group spent the rest of the week, they would not make eye contact with him. They would not talk to him. It changed the entire dynamic that they had with him. And Ryan says throughout this week, this is what's going on. And he realizes, he's like, I'm gonna have to do something with these guys. Because the truth is, if you're Ryan, if you're me, if you work in youth ministry, you can't hold grudges for very long. You just can't, because they're gonna do something else. And so you kind of let it go pretty quick. So while these guys were really uncomfortable and didn't wanna make eye contact, he's already over it. He's already navigated 2 other issues. And so he walks in the cafeteria and they're all sitting there together and he goes, hey guys. And they just didn't say anything to him because they feel weird. And he goes, okay, I got to do something about this. So he goes, and he's sitting down close to them, especially this kid that it's his first time with Cassis and is genuinely scared of Ryan. And he hasn't interacted yet, and you're not talking to him yet. But in that moment, his family was here on campus with him. And so his daughter walks in the cafeteria, and his daughter's like 4 or 5. And his daughter sees him in front of all these students, goes, Dad, and starts running for him through the cafeteria, which if you can imagine a 4 or 5-year-old girl like weaving these high school students, like this is a big deal. And actually like, jumps on his lap and and just starts telling him all about her day. She's like, this is what I did, and I went to the beach, and I'm so excited to see you, and this is what the student said, and this is my favorite person. And she's just like going on and on and on. And all these freshman boys are watching this moment. And that new guy starts getting really confused. And Ryan says he remembers when the new kid leaned over to his daughter and goes, dude, aren't you scared of your dad? Aren't you scared of him? Right? And the sweetest thing is Ryan so remembers his daughter looking at this kid like, why? This is my dad. Like, she's like offended about this 15-year-old. She doesn't know what's happened with broken beds and all the things. And she looks at this kid and is like, why would I be scared? I get to run at him. I get to be hugged by him. He's excited to see me. I get to be here, and he wants to hear all my stories because he's my dad. And what's so interesting is that Ryan shared a long time later, this kid actually kept coming back. He actually came to small groups, and he actually stayed connected. And a long time later, he shared with Ryan, what changed it for him was seeing Ryan with his daughter. He said, watching you with her in that cafeteria changed the way I felt about you, because if you can care about her like that, maybe you actually care about us. Because there was something about opening himself up to what a son or a daughter gets to experience changes how you see the Father. So maybe for us, if we see God as the keeper of the rules, as this angry judge who is always frustrated with us and we're never measuring up to be enough, what if we challenge ourselves to actually see him as our heavenly Father? Or what if we see God as someone who does not have room for us because our value and our worth are always on the line, and we're carrying this incredible pressure to be enough, to do enough, to produce enough, to look the right way? And what if we actually turned to God and said, I think he's my dad. I think I get to make myself home here. I think he might actually like me and be excited to see me, and I actually get to be my real self here because I am a son, I am a daughter, I am a kid of God. And that doesn't just change the way that we view ourselves, it actually gets to change the way that we see God. So may we get to step into that this week. And may we get to see God as our heavenly Father, as our dad who genuinely loves us and is excited about us. And we get to make ourselves home in that relationship with him. If you guys would pray with me. God, thank you so much for the way that you love us. Thank you, God, for the way that you love us, that you would help us to be brave enough to step into that, to trust you with that, to trust you with that value, to trust you with that worth, God. And we do want to lift up Ryan Kramer. We pray that you would heal him and help him to rest, and that he might feel better at some point this week, God. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, if you guys do see Ryan Kramer, again, 6'5", pick on him a lot because he thought he'd be here with pneumonia. But also, if you are interested in learning about the water walk or how to volunteer with Easter, which is going to be an amazing time, right over here, there's some QR codes and people who can answer some questions. If you want to meet me or find out a few steps about getting connected here at Cassis, over here, and also our prayer place will be open. Go home and watch some basketball. Happy Sunday, guys.